Can you imagine dedicating 5 years of your professional life to an organization, putting up all-star caliber numbers night after night, only to discover they're so desperate to get rid of you that they'd rather eat millions in dead money than keep you around for one more season? Welcome to Nikola Vucevic'S nightmare and the Chicago Bulls' stunning display of organizational ruthlessness that's about to shock the entire basketball world. The news broke like a thunderbolt across the NBA landscape, leaving fans and analysts scrambling to process what might be the most cold-blooded front office decision in recent memory. After years of trade rumors that led nowhere, the Bulls have apparently reached their breaking point with their veteran center. And their solution is so extreme it borders on organizational cruelty. The death of basketball loyalty. Let's be brutally honest about what we're witnessing here. The complete annihilation of any pretense that player loyalty matters in today's NBA. Nikola Vucevic didn't just show up to Chicago and collect paychecks. This man averaged 18.2 points, 10.7 rebounds, and 3.4 assists during his Bulls tenure, providing exactly the kind of consistent production that franchises supposedly value. But apparently, none of that matters when a front office decides you're inconvenient to their future plans. The Bulls have essentially told a productive veteran that his contributions mean so little to them that they'd prefer to pay him not to play rather than figure out how to integrate him into their roster construction. This isn't just a basketball decision, it's a character assassination disguised as salary cap management. How do you look your teammates in the eye when the organization just demonstrated that years of professional excellence can be discarded without ceremony? How do you trust management's promises about building culture when they're willing to humiliate their own players in pursuit of financial flexibility? The trade market that never existed. The most damning aspect of this entire saga is how it exposes the Bulls' complete mismanagement of Vucevic'S value over the past several seasons. According to reports, Chicago has been trying to move their center for years, which raises an uncomfortable question. If you've been shopping a player for multiple seasons without success, what does that say about your evaluation of his worth? Either the Bulls have been wildly overvaluing Vucevic in trade discussions, or they've been so desperate to move him that other franchises recognize their desperation and refuse to offer fair compensation. Both scenarios reflect poorly on Chicago's front office competence, but the outcome remains the same. A productive player becomes worthless because of organizational mismanagement. The phrase trade market for Vucevic has basically vanished isn't just a reflection of his declining value, it's an indictment of how the Bulls have handled his situation. When no team in the league wants to acquire a center averaging nearly 19 points and 11 rebounds, you have to question whether the problem lies with the player or the organization trying to move him. Financial suicide or strategic genius? Here's where the story takes its most bizarre turn. The Bulls are apparently willing to release Vucevic and eat his entire remaining salary rather than find creative ways to utilize his talents. In an era where every dollar of cap space matters, Chicago is prepared to pay millions for literally nothing in return. This decision defies basic economic logic unless you believe the Bulls have identified some massive upcoming opportunity that requires this exact amount of cap relief. But what realistic scenario justifies paying a productive player to leave rather than extracting any value from his presence on the roster? The financial implications extend beyond just Vucevic'S contract. When word spreads that Chicago is willing to release productive veterans rather than honor their commitments, how does that affect their ability to attract future free agents? Why would any established player want to join an organization that treats its veterans like disposable assets? The Swiss exile option, perhaps the most heartbreaking element of this entire situation, is how Vucevic'S potential destinations reflect the Bulls' treatment of his career. A player who has been a consistent NBA contributor for years is now contemplating whether to continue his career overseas, potentially in the EuroLeague, where his Swiss background might provide some cultural comfort. Think about the psychological impact of that transition. Vucevic would go from being a central figure on an NBA roster to essentially starting over in a foreign league. Not because of declining performance, but because his current organization couldn't figure out how to value his contributions appropriately. The EuroLeague option isn't necessarily a step down in terms of basketball quality, but it represents a fundamental shift in career trajectory that Vucevic likely never anticipated when he signed with Chicago. His Swiss heritage might make the transition easier, but it doesn't eliminate the professional disappointment of being essentially forced out of the world's premier basketball league. The domino effect on team chemistry, what the Bulls apparently haven't considered, is how this decision affects every other player in their locker room. When you demonstrate such callous disregard for a veteran's contributions, you send a message to the entire roster about how expendable they really are. Young players watch how organizations treat their veterans because it previews their own potential future. If the Bulls can discard Vucevic after 5 seasons of solid production, what guarantee do developing players have that their loyalty and improvement will be rewarded rather than dismissed when convenient? The timing makes this situation even more problematic. During a very busy offseason, when the Bulls presumably want to create positive momentum around their franchise, they're instead generating headlines about organizational dysfunction and player mistreatment. The international implications Vucevic'S situation also highlights broader issues about how NBA franchises handle international players. His Swiss background and European playing experience provide him with options that American players might not have, but that doesn't excuse the Bulls' apparent mishandling of his career trajectory. International players often face additional challenges in terms of cultural adaptation and family considerations when making career decisions. The possibility of Vucevic returning to European basketball isn't just about professional opportunities. It could involve completely restructuring his personal life and family situation. The Bulls' willingness to potentially force this decision demonstrates a troubling lack of consideration for how their roster moves affect players as human beings rather than just basketball assets. A precedent for organizational ruthlessness, what makes this story particularly significant is how it establishes a new benchmark for how NBA franchises might handle unwanted contracts in the future. If the Bulls can simply release a productive veteran rather than finding creative solutions, other organizations might adopt similar approaches when dealing with players they consider expendable. This precedent could fundamentally alter how players approach contract negotiations and team loyalty. Why invest emotionally in an organization's success when that same organization might decide your contributions are worthless before your contract expires? The ripple effects could extend throughout the league as players and agents adjust their strategies based on how the Bulls handle this situation. Trust between players and management represents one of the NBA's most valuable but fragile assets, and Chicago might be damaging that relationship across the entire league. The ultimate question of values, as we process this stunning development in Chicago, we're forced to confront uncomfortable questions about what modern NBA franchises actually value. Is consistent production meaningless if it doesn't align with front office timelines? Do years of professional commitment count for nothing when organizations decide to change direction? The Bulls' apparent decision to release Vucevic rather than find alternative solutions suggests that player welfare and organizational loyalty have become completely secondary to financial convenience and front office flexibility. It's a sobering reminder that NBA basketball is ultimately a business, but it's also a troubling indication of how callous that business has become. Nikola Vucevic'S situation represents more than just one player's career crossroads. It's a defining moment for how we understand the relationship between NBA players and the organizations they serve. The Bulls might solve their immediate roster construction problems, but they're creating a legacy of ruthlessness that could haunt their franchise for years to come. This story has me genuinely angry about how organizations can treat dedicated professionals, and I'm curious whether you share that outrage or see this as just smart business. Do you think the Bulls are making a necessary tough decision, or are they setting a dangerous precedent for how teams handle veteran players? Let me know in the comments where you stand on this brutal organizational move, and hit that like button if you think this story deserves more attention than it's getting in the mainstream media.